Alpine has won its battle to have the Monaco Grand Prix result overturned. Pierre Gasly, now third place finisher after all, after a dramatic intervention by the FIA. They reviewed the penalties given to Gasly during the Monaco Grand Prix for pit lane speeding, and now he gets his third place after all, but not his moment on the podium. I've got Scott Mitchell-Mound with me to discuss this extraordinary moment in F1. Normally, rights of review, as Alpine applied for, don't really work and waste everyone's time, but this time, amazingly, they've succeeded. So the obvious question, Scott, is what made the stewards change their mind?
Basically, this all came down to what counts as speeding and how speeding's actually measured, because the first thing to kind of note really is within the regulations actually that it just refers to a speed limit. There's nothing that states this is how it's exactly determined. So the way of describing it would be just because it was measured as such on the day doesn't mean that's the definitive kind of pit lane speed limit, if that makes sense. So there was kind of latitude here for the stewards to revisit it, assuming Alpine brought new evidence to the table, and Alpine did. This is what's critical to the stewards changing their mind. What made this review possible is that Formula One management, which is the official timekeeper, basically said off the back of Monaco that the distance measured for the pit lane, which sets everything from that point onwards, because the speed is calculated by the time taken to travel between distance points in the pit lane, was wrong. They had that mistaken. The F1's, I've got the notes here because it's a very, very dense document. I want to make sure I don't get any of this wrong. Basically, a post-event LiDAR scan revealed that the first timing zone, which is where the Gasly offences, and in fact all the offences took place, was actually 77 centimetres shorter than the distance used to calculate speeds during the race. So this was significant, it was new, it was relevant. That's what got the review opened. And then basically the stewards effectively did a back calculation from that point. So was able to get to a reasonable enough level of confidence, basically, that if you covered the distance that Gasly most likely covered rather than what the system assumed he covered, he was not speeding. And there is a degree of assumption in that, as we're going to get into in this video.
So firstly, it's not a case that cars were actually over a speed limit, because normally people would think, oh, you're speeding because the speed you actually did as registered on your dash or whatever is too high. But actually it's not the case. It's a simple mass calculation based on averages and the distance. And it sounds like actually the information, the core bit of information, knowing how long your pit lane was, actually was just completely incorrect. So how on earth did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. The kind of idea I've had in my mind throughout all of this, and we can put something on the screen here, hopefully, to kind of characterise it, is the basic triangle that I learned back at school when doing mathematics, which is speed equals distance over time. And that is how the F1 system works. It's distance divided by time between two loops, and this distance is determined by satellite measurement and verified with on-track checking. In this case, the first zone, it was 2,692 centimetres. Now, I believe that this is exactly the same process and distances used in previous Monaco Grand Prix, but the tricky thing about Monaco is the pit lane is curved both on entry through the fast lane and on exit, which actually means the shortest path through the pit lane, which is what needs to be used when calculating the distance for the pit lane speed. It's not a straight line. You can obviously cut it. And the best way of kind of summarising it is that the way the cars took the pit lane this year, including some pit entry barrier repositioning, meant that the shortest theoretical distance was a lot shorter, that's 77 centimetres shorter than what had been used to set the system. So it's an oversight, basically, based on what it was in reality versus what it was in expectation. Gasly wouldn't have been able to actually travel the theoretical shortest distance because there probably would have been pit equipment in the way. That doesn't factor in the widths of the car, but basically he would have fallen somewhere between the pit distance as it should have been measured and the pit distance as it was measured. So yeah, basically the system's designed to find the minimum distance and apply that, and in this instance it's failed.
The strange thing about the stewards document is that the stewards themselves during the race found it unusual that so many cars were being found to have had these micro infractions of 0.1 kilometre an hour of the pit lane speed limit, and queried it with the timekeepers, but the timekeepers at the time said, oh no, everything is as it should be. So why did this only emerge post-race, considering not only were the stewards a bit perplexed, but also teams and drivers were discussing this earlier in the weekend and actually trying to make allowances for the fact that the pit lane was different to how everyone expected?
Well, ultimately, Alpine's just been smarter than all of us in this entire process, because on Sunday evening, we, like most people, were absolutely adamant that this would probably be a waste of time, and ultimately it's just not done a good enough job in mitigating the circumstances at play. There was a little bit of a question mark on Sunday evening that maybe there was something in the calculation that was a bit off, but it was broadly accepted that you have to kind of play it as it lies. Effectively, this is the system in place. I think you described it as well on that evening, Ben. It's like it's basically the scales of the day. If you know, from a measuring the weight limit perspective, that's how it is. That's how it's being measured. If you're on the wrong side of it, you're on the wrong side of it. But Alpine was absolutely adamant that there could be something here. And remember, managing director Steve Nielsen has a vast amount of experience working behind the scenes at Formula One management and the FIA. So if anyone's going to have an idea that something might be up, it's probably Alpine's day-to-day boss. So they were well positioned to be able to do this. You're right that it was only noted during the race that the breaches were repeatedly occurring at a tiny level, so it was queried with race control. But the FIA, because the system was working as it should, it's calculating the speed based on this information, everything's assumed to be correct, they didn't think anything was amiss. It was only afterwards that they realised that all the breaches had occurred in exactly the same place, so the same timing loop zone, which was at the pit entry. And then obviously afterwards, as I said at the start, you then had this LiDAR check, which then revealed that the distance should have been a lot shorter than it was, and that came out through the official timekeeper, FOM, producing its own report, which confirmed this measurement gap and basically supported Alpine's argument.
Yeah, I have to say I'm so surprised. Usually in motorsport, a judge of fact, as things like weight and time and speed usually are, you don't expect to be able to successfully query those things. Even if the system is wonky, it's the system of the day and you have to abide by it. And of course, 17 drivers weren't penalised for speeding in the pits during the Monaco Grand Prix, so managed to take account of it. But nevertheless, we saw Alpine with their guy and his trundle wheel measuring the pit lane themselves after that race. I thought to myself, it's not going to work. Yeah, go through the process, but these rights of review, they always get thrown out. I certainly didn't expect the result to be overturned, but nevertheless, Alpine has proven all of us wrong, and no surprise that they're quite triumphant in victory, if a little bit sad that they didn't get their moment on the podium. We've heard from Managing Director Steve Nielsen in the Barcelona paddock, and our own Ed Straw was on the ground to hear from him, so we can hear from Ed now.
We just heard from Alpine Managing Director Steve Nielsen. His message was they sought justice and they got justice with getting the third place back. But interestingly, one thing he did say was that there is almost an intangible loss as well, because they didn't have the moment on the podium, the celebration, the emotion. And he said he would actually trade the points that they gained for having that moment back, which of course has been lost. So even though Alpine has won its podium back and justice was served, they still feel like they've missed out on something, because a podium for this team means the world when you think about how difficult things have been for them over the past 18 months, if not more. So that's one thing. But overall, they were very, very happy with the process. Were very, very, very appreciative of the fact that FOM didn't attempt to hide things or cover stuff up. They were very cooperative, so tackling the timekeeper problem, etc., was done properly. They got a report on Wednesday afternoon that revealed all the details of it, and very, very happy with the process, which of course they will be. One thing I did ask was, given Io Komatsu, the Haas team principal, had mentioned, well, you have the chance in the weekend to get on top of this, and there was knowledge that there was a problem. There was a meeting about it earlier in the weekend that Steve Nielsen referred to in terms of the teams, and that there was an undiagnosed problem. And Komatsu's arguments were, well, you should have made some allowances for it, which of course didn't happen. However, I asked Nielsen if there was any things that they could have done in terms of processes, knowing what they knew at the time, to get ahead of it and prevent it. And he said no, because fundamentally the data they had said that they were respecting the speed limits. There's a lot going on there. Expect a more robust system to be used in the future. But for now, Alpine just happy they've got their result back, even though they couldn't celebrate in the way they wanted to.
Alpine, understandably quite triumphant there, and I imagine there will be some kind of handing over of the trophy ceremony involving Red Bull and Pierre Gasly at some point in the future, unless, of course, this whole thing is challenged by Alpine's rivals. Scott, do you think there's any kind of window open to them? Because not only do various teams and drivers stand to lose out on results because of Gasly getting his third place back, there are also other drivers who were penalised in the race but didn't go through this right of review process.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always the option of appealing a steward's decision, which this is. McLaren, we know, has informed of its intention to appeal, which is kind of like a preliminary phase. It doesn't mean that it's definitely going ahead. It just buys itself a bit of time to decide whether to do it. So as it stands, this is not case closed. While we're recording this right now, we don't know what Red Bull and Racing Bulls, which are two other teams that stand to lose from this or do lose out from this pulling back of the Gasly penalties, and we're also involved in the process, as we've said, in terms of trying to keep the penalty in place in the first place. We don't know what they're going to do, so by the time this video comes out, they might have appealed, intended to appeal, said they're not going to do anything and accept it. Let's wait and see exactly on that. But they certainly have grounds to be frustrated. Absolutely. There's two elements to that. One is that if you're McLaren and Oscar Piastri's lost the better result, he'd have been ahead of Gasly on the road anyway without serving his penalty, I believe. So that was served in the race. And as the stewards mentioned, they have some sympathy for the drivers that did cop a penalty and, unlike Gasly, served it in the race. So there's just no mechanism to pull that back. We saw that last year at Zandvoort when Carlos Sainz incorrectly, it turned out, got given a penalty, but because he served it, the steward said, "We're sorry, we were wrong, we'll pull your licence penalty points back, but you can't get the time back because there's no mechanism for that." Gasly's was a straight. He had 10 seconds added to his race time at the end of the race, so they just undo that. The other element that I guess could be challenged is whether or not the FIA has definitely got the proof required that Gasly didn't speed and that it's worth overturning the results, because this wasn't 100%. There's a certain level of proof required to make this kind of judicial determination. In this case, the FIA needs to get to what they call comfortable satisfaction, which means a strong and clear conviction that Gasly didn't speed. This is met as far as the stewards are concerned. They're happy they've reached that. They even said that it goes almost as far as one of the highest levels that you get in most judicial systems, which is beyond reasonable doubt, which basically means almost absolute certainty. So as far as the stewards are concerned, this went beyond their own threshold. It almost met the highest possible legal threshold outside of the FIA's own institution. So that conviction's required from the steward's side. Let's see if any of the other teams decide to challenge it.